this is not just a technology problem. This is also a people challenge. But all of this is easier if we do it together. If we share with one another, if we partner, if we collaborate, if we commiserate. If we turn to one another and we ask, what's your plan? And what are your barriers? And how can I learn from your successes and your setbacks? And Verge is designed to create these meaningful interactions. We have assembled a team of experts that have put together over 100 sessions across 6 different programs that are all designed to get to the challenges that you in this room have in achieving your goals. We have created more interactive sessions, more small group discussions, more sessions that are just based around being able to meet one another and understand what your challenges are. This year, we are also launching GreenBiz, which is an online app that allows us to find the people at this conference better, so you are able to have the conversations that you need. In short, we have curated the conditions for you to learn from experts, from each other, and from the broader Verge community, which is the largest ever, by the way. There will be over 5,000 people this week at the San Jose Convention Center. So yes, this task is huge, and the payback is massive. All of you in this room have tremendous power. As far as I can tell, the private sector is the only sector that is nimble enough to actually be able to prove out technologies at a time frame we need to address the climate crisis. And when you act, things happen. We get policy, capital flows, businesses thrive, jobs are created, communities prosper. And Verge is a catalyst for change. It's an incubator for progress. So let's figure out how to get from here to a resilient and sustainable future. And with that, it is my honor to welcome you all to Verge23. We have an incredible program planned for you today, and it's starting out with a friend of mine, Shayle Khan. You likely know Shayle as the host of the Catalyst podcast. He is also a partner at Energy Impact Partner, where he invests in revolutionary Climatech. And he will be joining us today to talk about the state of Climatech. So I'd like to invite out Shayle Khan. I've actually, not quite yet, Shayle, I actually have a little game that I have devised for you as part of this introduction. So if people have listened to the Catalyst podcast, you will know that it focuses on climate tech, and each episode focuses on a different technology. And Shayle often starts out with a pun or a play on words to highlight whatever technology this is.
That's not really, that's not on purpose. I'm just kind of a funny person. I'm not trying to, go on.
It works. So what I have done is I have put together a series of puns. And what I would like to do is to share a pun that Shayle used to tee up a technology and ask what technology it is that he's talking about.
I don't think you appreciate how little I know what I'm saying.
We'll see how this goes. But I also think that this is too easy. I think you've written these puns, you know these puns. And something you may not know about Shayle is that when he was younger, he was a professional juggler. He was a child clown. Did I say that?
Well, those are very different things. I was sort of a professional juggler as a kid.
So I would like you to answer these. Wild jump.
So I saw the juggling balls on stage and I knew something like this was coming up. I just want to be clear, this is the second time you've ambushed me with the juggling thing. The other time was during COVID at like on a webinar or something. So I'll do this, but we're agreed this is the last one. This is a prerequisite for
You
me.
gonna take this offline? Okay. So, are you ready? Hey, Kevin, do you have any Catalyst music you can play?
Please.
Okay. So, starting out, the first one is, I would make a blank joke, but I don't want to give it any oxygen.
Oh my God, what was I talking about? You don't want to give it any oxygen?
I wouldn't want to give it any oxygen.
Was that like a hydrogen electrolysis thing? It splits hydrogen and oxygen?
It is anaerobic digestion. I do not want to give it any oxygen. The next one is,
That was a good one. That was a good cut.
okay. This week, it's blank, not blank, but that's splitting atoms.
Nuclear.
So what is it? This week, it's blank,
Oh,
not blank.
fission, not fusion, or fusion, not fission.
Correct, yes. Yeah. Okay, this one
The
is,
jumping part is the easy part of this, but
hello, Daddy, hello, Mom, it's a blank bomb.
oh, cherry. It's I have no idea.
Methane bomb.
Methane
This one
bomb.
is
Oh,
a methane bomb. Okay.
All right.
Hey, look, on the grid, it's a battery. It's the world's most flexible load. It's a vampire squid. It's blank.
It's a battery. Oh, Bitcoin mining.
That is correct.
I remember that.
All right. Okay. Blank leakage is nothing to make light of.
Make light of hydrogen?
That's correct. Woo! Yeah. Okay.
This is stressful.
Some might say food is energy. Just food for thought.
Well, the food energy nexus.
Yes, that is correct. That is correct. Okay.
Sun was in my eyes.
Okay.
Classic juggling drop joke.
We have one more question, and for this, I would like to add one more ball. Are you ready for this?
I don't know.
What the drinking game your wife has developed throughout your podcast?
Oh, I say everything in numbers. I'm like, there will be three things that will matter in terms of that game, and I list three things.
That's correct. So you can now play along next time you listen to Catalyst. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I just want to be clear, we all agree this is never happening again. You all heard Sarah confirm it. All right, that was unexpected. Okay, on to the state of Climatech, super relevant. Okay, so my job is to spend 15 minutes talking about the state of Climatech. There's obviously way too much going on in Climatech to talk about in 15 minutes, but I will say this to start. I'm excited about the fact that Climatech is a thing. You know, I was thinking back on, so I've been doing stuff in what we now call Climatech, but did not for a long time for my career. And for most of that time, first it was clean tech, right? And then that fell out of favor, and then we stayed away from that term, and we started grasping around for things like sustainability and resource efficiency and whatever else we wanted to call it. And then like 3-4 years ago, Climatech emerged. And now we had something to call it again. And it has really galvanized a movement community and a sector of sorts in a way that is incredibly exciting. So I'm happy to be able to talk about the state of Climatech. I think I have three things that, as I was thinking about the state of this space, matter to me at a high level. The first is that it's actually, the way that I think about it at least, it's fairly simple, it's fairly straightforward, which is appealing. The second is that I wouldn't confuse simple with easy. It's hard. That's no big surprise. Everybody knows Climatech is going to be hard to achieve what we need achieve, but I think it's perhaps even harder than we give it credit for often and harder in different ways. And the third is sort of an orthogonal thing, which is basically the way that I think about climate tech, the tech portion of that, the technologies that need to be developed to get us to the promised land, they come in waves, and any given technology fits somehow into a wave. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So let's start with why it's deceivingly simple. To me, when you really boil it down, climate tech is easily measurable in a single metric, which is tons of CO2 equivalent, right? We know as a society what we need to do, society globally, right? And that is to go from where we are today, which is roughly 50 gigatons of annual CO2 equivalent emissions, 50 billion tons a year. We need to take that down to zero or net negative, potentially, by mid-century or earlier. That's the job. And so for me, as I think about what is climate tech, before we get to what's happening in climate tech, if you can measure the impact of a thing, a movement, a technology, a company, whatever it might be, in either direct reduction or removal of CO2 equivalent, or if it has some indirect impact on the ability to get there, which is important, right? Enabling technologies that make it possible for us to electrify things, or make it possible for us to have a just transition, which we're going to need to have in order for that transition to occur. Anything that you can tie directly or indirectly to CO2 equivalent, that's climate tech. Maybe it's a little bit controversial. If you can't, I would say it's not. Not to say it's not worth doing, but to say it's a different thing. And for me, that's a useful guiding principle, because once you go one level deeper than just CO2 equivalent, things start to get pretty complicated. And you can look at these charts, and I love a Sankey chart. That's the name of this type of chart, my favorite type of chart in the world. If anybody has cool Sankey charts, send them my way. This is where all the emissions come from in the world, the CO2 emissions, and it's really complicated, unsurprisingly. So, to simplify that, here's what we need to do, basically, to solve climate change at the highest level. We just need to transform 5 sectors: energy, transportation, industry, buildings, and food and agriculture. Those 5 together comprise the vast majority of all CO2 and actually greenhouse gas emissions in the world. So, what I mean when I say climate tech, I often tell people I don't think climate tech actually is a sector. It's just a common theme across a number of sectors, a common problem that we face across a number of sectors, and mostly it's these 5. So what is climate tech mostly going to ultimately be? It's going to be technologies that transform one of these or multiple of these 5 sectors, and then I would add on another half sector, which is carbon management, which is basically entirely new, right? So these other 5 are like existing multi-trillion-dollar global industries that drive the world. So we need to transform those 5 and then invent a new one, because we don't really manage CO2 today. We're going to need to do that, whether that's biogenic CO2 from wood waste as we thin forests in California, or whether that's direct air capture from the sky, or point source capture on heavy emitters, whatever it might be. We're going to need to capture some of that CO2. We're going to need to do something with it, and that's carbon management. So there's our job in climate tech, right? It's also helpful, I think, to think about it in a temporal perspective, right? The timeline in which we need to do that. So just for context, right? Basically, to get to where we are today, to create the problem that we created, where we have 50 gigatons of emissions every year, it took us about 100 years, roughly, from the dawn of the Industrial Revolution until fairly recently. You know, think of that as the lifespan, more or less, of my grandparents' generation, right? When they were born, we were not that much out of equilibrium. By the time they passed away, we were roughly at the spot that we're at today. So about 100 years to get there. You know all the things that happened over the course of those 100 years. Amazing growth in our quality of living and population growth, but it came at this cost of emissions. So to contextualize the pace at which climate tech needs to happen, this is my son, Atticus. He's 20 months old right now, so he was born in February of last year. This is him eating a mole drumstick, which is one of his favorite foods. And I think about it, unsurprisingly, because I'm a young child, in the context of his lifespan, right? And so if to get to 50 gigatons of emissions, it took an entire lifespan, in fact, a little bit longer, 100 years, you know, what the IPCC math is telling us is that we need to get from 50 down to 0 and then negative, because we're probably going to overshoot by 2050 or earlier. So 2050, Atticus is going to be 28 right? He's going to be younger than most people in this room. It's really not a lot of time to reverse a 100-year-long trend. And so, though climate tech and the idea around what we're trying to do is fairly straightforward, to reduce CO2 emissions, the pace at which we need to do it is somewhat daunting. And that speaks to the other point, which is that it's really hard. When people talk about how the various components of climate tech, the sectors that it comprises, oftentimes there's this term that I'm on a soapbox, so I get to shout from it right now. There's a term people start to use that's hard to abate, right? And usually when they talk about hard to abate sectors, they're referring to things like industry, buildings, and food and agriculture. You also hear it a lot often within industry in the context of steel and cement and chemicals. These are the hard to abate sectors. I don't disagree with that. I think it's going to be hard. But the implication there is that some of the others, and I think particularly people who are referring to energy, will be easy. And I don't think that's true at all. So I want to spend 1 minute just talking about energy. It's partially because I spend most of my time there, but also because I think it's indicative of how we have to think about the types of challenges we face here. So to the highest level, the heuristic for how do we solve climate change and energy is also pretty simple. And I think most folks would agree with this. It is decarbonize electricity, then electrify everything you reasonably can electrify, thereby switching things onto a decarbonized grid, and then pick up the remaining pieces via some combination of carbon management and clean fuels, right? So if we're going to do that, then the electrification part of that, step 2 in that journey, means we're going to, drive electric vehicles up to significant adoption, ultimately maybe 100% of the market, at least for light-duty passenger vehicles. We're going to use heat pumps instead of gas boilers. We're going to turn some industry into electrically powered. We're going to power a bunch of other stuff with electricity as well. And indeed, I think a lot of that is going to happen. A lot of that is going to be great. But I do want to point out the magnitude of that challenge that it introduces in the energy sector. As it stands today, and I think people often don't remember this, electricity is about 20% of final end-use energy consumption. So of all of our energy consumption in the United States, 20% is electricity, the other 80% is not. And what we're doing in the context of electrifying things is shifting that mix, right? And so if you add it up in sort of an extreme version, you take current electricity consumption and you add all the light-duty vehicles and heavy-duty vehicles and space heating, industrial process heat, and a bunch of other stuff, expectations are that we might double or triple the size of the grid, the demand for electricity. So what we're trying to do in solving the problem around energy is decarbonize the electricity sector while we are doubling or tripling it. And that is not the historical trend, right? We've been in a period of fairly flat electricity demand, save for GDP growth, for a couple of decades. So we're bending that curve back upward, and we're bending it fast while we try to decarbonize the entire sector, which is to say that I don't think it's an easy to abate sector. I think there's a lot of work to be done there, and lots of opportunity around the periphery if you think about all those challenges that get introduced, which speaks to my final point about building a wave or riding a wave. So I'm in the business of venture capital. I invest in early stage technology companies that do something that is going to help mitigate climate change, right? And so I see a lot of companies and they're telling their story and pitching their vision. Usually at some point, I either answer myself or ask them the question of, are you going to build a wave or are you going to ride a wave, right? And what I mean by that is, I think what's going to happen in order for 50 gigatons to turn to zero, in order for climate tech to remain a vibrant sector, is that a bunch of major technology transformations are going to have to occur, right? And for every one of those, as I said, they're going to have to transform these sectors of the economy that are like as big as literally anything else. I was trying to think about the largest sectors of the economy that climate change won't touch. It's probably none, but if you're going to point to one, maybe it's healthcare in the immediate sense, setting aside the health impacts of climate change itself. Which is to say, these are big sectors, and a major technological transformation that fundamentally transforms those sectors is going to be huge. But alongside that transformation is going to come 100 knock-on effects, maybe 1,000 knock-on effects. Other things that are going to have to get built around the periphery, the infrastructure to do it, the deployment models, other technologies. And so I think there is opportunity at both the build a wave level, which is to say, enable one of these massive transformations to occur where otherwise would not, and at the one level beneath that, which is to say, if that transformation is to occur, here's a bunch of other things that need to happen. So, classic example of this, right? Electric vehicles. I think we can pretty safely say that we would not have the level of adoption of electric vehicles globally, I should say today, that we do were it not for Tesla. Now, maybe we would have ultimately made that transition anyway, it would have occurred at a different rate, et cetera, et cetera. But Tesla was, no question, wave creator, right? The wave of electric vehicle adoption was built by one company and then a million other things happening that enabled that company. But really one company. Thanks to the fact that that wave has been built, though, there will be, I don't know, 100, 1,000 more companies that are going to come along and deliver something of meaningful value and good returns to their investors. And they're the wave riders. And they're going to build better batteries, and they're going to build charging infrastructure. They're going to source sustainably extract lithium, whatever it might be. And all these things are coming largely because the wave was built. And so when I'm talking to early stage companies, one of the main things that I'm focused on is, are you building a wave or are you riding a wave? There's not a right answer. Building a wave is a lot harder. It's really, really, really hard. You have to change the world. You have to bend the world to your technology. But if you can figure out what waves are being built, you can time them right, you can build something of value in the context of that transformation, then riding a wave is an incredibly smart strategy as well. So I'll finish it up by just saying I'm like the world's worst surfer, but I intend to ride a bunch of these waves. This is sort of what I've been trying to do my entire career, long before Climatech was called Climatech. We've had a number of waves. They've had the capacity to be ridden, right? And some of them are cresting now. The wave of renewable energy being cost competitive. What an amazing thing to say today. If you had been at Verge 10 years ago, that absolutely would not have been true. And that was a wave that was clearly building then and has now reached critical mass globally. There's so many more waves to come. And so for me, it's just incredibly exciting to be in the circle of people, which is everybody here, who is trying to build or ride one of these waves, and hopefully is a better surfer than I am. So with that, thank you, and I look forward to spending time with you all over the next couple of days.
Hi, I'm Alex Navarro, Senior Manager of Nature for GreenBiz. In the world of carbon, natural climate solutions are having a big year. My overhyped trend of planting new forests. A recent study looked at a subset of Fortune 500 companies and found that 98% had been involved in tree planting projects. So what's the problem? Much of the land and water identified for these projects is already supporting other habitat types, native wildlife, people, and economies. And the traits that make forests such long-term carbon sinks, like large trees, soil accumulation, can take centuries to recreate. There's a more effective, immediate, and low-cost approach, and that's the protection and improved management of existing forests. Natural forests store more carbon and living biomass, coarse woody debris, and soils. So let's take care of existing forests and the communities that steward them before planting more. This brings me to my underhyped trend, the ecosystem that rarely gets as much attention as forests, oceans. Oceans absorb 1/3 of human carbon emissions, yet life below water is the least funded of all the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Over the past 2 years, we've invested just 5% of what's needed to achieve our global targets. This year, UN member states finally agreed on the High Seas Treaty, a promise to take collective responsibility for the 64% of the ocean that lies beyond jurisdictional boundary. With the tides finally shifting in the ocean's favor, investors should look to the blue economy, blue foods, and marine biodiversity credits as their next big climate investment. Nature is basically the 4-hour workweek of climate solutions, if only we let it do some of the work for us.
I'm Seth Olson, Senior Manager of Food Systems at GreenBiz. Over the last 5 years, regenerative agriculture has gone from niche to mainstream, and now dominates climate strategies at global food companies such as Cargill, Danone, and Walmart. Regenerative practices boost soil health, increase nutritional quality, and reduce pollution. Under the right conditions, they can also sequester carbon. And this is what companies often tout the loudest. But scientists warn that in practice, the sequestration potential of agricultural soils is significantly overestimated. That's why regenerating soils to draw down carbon is my overhyped trend for 2023. While beneficial for resilience, the challenges and uncertainty around soil carbon drawdown present a mismatch between the hype and the true potential. This is especially apparent compared to the more effective and certain ways to address nitrous oxide, deforestation, and livestock emissions. The focus on sequestering carbon in soils is not the radical change required to flip our food system from extractive and unhealthy to one that regenerates both people and planet. This leads me to my underhyped trend, regenerating farm worker well-being. Our current food system mines not only the earth, but also the health of farm workers. Folks who are heroes for putting food on our table. Too often, they're getting the short end of the stick. Here in the US, farm workers are exposed to extreme heat for about 15% of the season and are 20 times more likely to die of heat-related illness. Without greater protections and power, how can we expect farm workers to be the hands implementing change in our rapidly warming fields? Farm workers deserve better, and companies must start integrating social regeneration into their climate strategies. Simply put, we'll only achieve environmental goals if we take care of the folks we rely on to achieve them.
Are you okay? 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 You've been hit by, you've been struck by the smooth criminal.
So when I asked people who was the best person to speak about our need to get serious about addressing fossil fuels, one name came up again and again, and that's Sephora Berman, who is the chair of the Fossil Fuels Non-Proliferation Treaty. And even if you don't know Sephora by name, you're likely familiar with her work. She is a talented campaigner, and she sort of walks that line of being provocative and wry and creating these campaigns that really stick in your memory. And she's been a campaigner for GreenBiz and for Stand.Earth all the way back when it was still forest ethics. And she's also sat at tables with the oil companies themselves, trying to figure out where do we actually go from here. So it is my honor to welcome to the stage Sephora Berman. Thank you so much, Sarah. And it is so incredible to be here. I mean, 5,000 people working on Climatech. You people give me hope. For the past 35 years, I've been working on environmental policy and climate policy, trying to figure out how social change is made, where power lies. My journey started here in the old-growth forest in Canada, the place of my heart. And along the way, I developed some campaigns to encourage companies and governments to make the changes that we need to make at the pace that we need to make them. I've run a lot of corporate campaigns over that time. And one of the most important things that I realized in doing those campaigns, this was a campaign I ran a long time ago. At the time, Victoria's Secret was producing 1 million catalogs a day out of Canada's old-growth forests. And during that campaign, I realized, of course, that there are good people everywhere. There are good people stuck in some really bad systems. And a lot of the people that we need to make the changes that we need to make today are still stuck in those systems, in those extractive industries. So when I started working on climate change in the Alberta tar sands, one of the belly of the beasts, I decided to sit down and meet with the oil companies to try and understand what they were thinking, to see if we could find some common ground. And we did. After several years of discussions with the CEOs of the 5 major oil companies, we were able to come to agreement on climate policy in Alberta. This is a region that had never had a climate policy before, never had a climate plan before, and it was even hearsay. I remember when I first started working in Alberta, meeting with a minister, and as we were walking into the legislature, I said something to her about climate change, and she said, "Oh, don't say that word here until we get into my office and it's private." So we reached an agreement for a climate plan. We stood on the stage, we announced it. We had reached agreement on carbon pricing, on an emissions cap in the oil sands. After the cameras were off, the companies backtracked. They lobbied against the legislation. They ensured that a new government was put in place who immediately eliminated the legislation. They ran ad campaigns fear-mongering on price and scarcity. And I started looking globally at what these companies were doing, because I learned a lot in those discussions. There are some really good people in the fossil fuel industry. And I think some of the people that I worked with were horrified to see what their companies were doing after the fact, after we had reached those agreements. And what I found is, although the companies are talking a good game and spending, in some cases, over 80% of their budget on their ads about how they're becoming energy companies, how they're investing in renewable energy, for the most part, the industry is investing about 1% in renewable energy and 99% in growing more oil, gas, and coal. When we look at how much they're spending lobbying, there's lots of data now from InfluenceMap and others that is showing us that these companies are successful in weakening climate policy at every level of government and internationally. When you add up what they're spending on advocacy, on their public relations, and not just their lobbying, it's in the billions. One study that was done in Canada looked at how many meetings are the companies having with the government. 11,000 meetings in 7 years, about 6 meetings a day between oil executives and our government officials. One of the most, I think, horrendous things I discovered was that the companies are promising technologies to clean up oil and gas, to reduce emissions, carbon capture and storage. But when you look at their success rate over the years versus their projections and their promises, it's not working. It's not working at scale, yet they're continuing to make these promises, and those promises are being baked into our plans, our legislations, and the billions they're getting from our governments. So why does this matter? It matters because 86% of the emissions that are trapped in our atmosphere today come from 3 things: oil, gas, and coal. And those emissions that are trapped, of course, are what's creating the fires, the floods, and the storms, and the heat waves sweeping our planet. In fact, the Paris Agreement, the world's climate agreement, it doesn't even include the words fossil fuels, or for that matter, oil, gas, or coal. Because the fossil fuel industry has been successful in making itself invisible. Right now, we're on track to produce 110% more oil, gas, and coal between now and 2030 than we can ever burn, or it will burn us. In fact, if we produce that much, it puts us on track, not for a 1.5-degree world, which is our goal under the Paris Agreement, not even for a 2-degree world, but for a much hotter world. So how's this happening? Because climate policy has been designed on a theory that the price for renewables and battery storage and other technologies will go down. Demand will peak and go down, and the markets will constrain supply. So we've been working, and our governments have been negotiating on emissions and targets about allowing production to increase. And the fact is, that theory is not working. Why? In part because we're giving $7 trillion a year in public money to the oil and gas and coal industries. That's about $11 million a minute in subsidies. So where are we today? We have pledges to about 1.5, our goal is 1.5. The pledges, a little over 2. Current policies will take us a little over 3 degrees. Where are the oil companies? If you look at their plans, they're planning production levels that are equivalent with a 3 to 4 degree world, not exactly net zero. So emissions are, of course, going up, but we need to get to a 45% reduction by 2030. How do we do that? We know what we're currently living in my country alone in Canada this summer. The fires lasted for 5 months. You could fit 50 countries into the area burned in Canada this year, and of course, tens of thousands of people lost their home, and around the world, millions of people lost their homes and their lives. The IEA reports that there's no need for new fossil fuel investment. And of course, civil society, indigenous leaders around the world have known this for decades and have been marching, saying keep it in the ground. But there hasn't been a pathway for how we constrain fossil fuel production. We keep negotiating with fossil fuel companies, helping them with your technologies. We need to stop negotiating with them and start regulating them. They're not going to manage their own decline. And the bottom line is that it's not a transition if we're continuing to grow the problem. So what do we need to do? Around the world, a group of people are now coalescing around an idea for a companion agreement to the Paris Agreement, a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. It's a hard word to say, you can just call it fossil fuel treaty. The fact is, we need to stop the expansion. We need governments to cooperate to do that. We need to manage a wind down of production along with the wind down of demand. And we need to do that in a way that is equitable and fair, because there are countries right now that are drilling for oil in the heart of the Amazon just to feed their debt. And we need to manage a just transition in a way that's fair and financed. So some say this is too big. It's going to take too long. We can't, but the fact is, we can't afford more of the same. And we know when we study landmines or chemical weapons bans or other treaties that at the point that countries propose it in the floor of the United Nations, it can be swift to create a new treaty. And no, some countries may never join, but they didn't join the landmine treaty either, or the nuclear treaty for that matter. But the journey matters, and we shifted what is acceptable. Already 8 countries have proposed the fossil fuel treaty on the floor of the United Nations, including and led by countries in the South Pacific that are facing the worst of the disaster today. In Vanuatu, yet another cyclone. But the good news is this movement is growing around the world. We have over 3,000 scientists that have joined the fossil fuel treaty, close to 1 million individuals, almost 100 cities, including LA, and many cities around the world who are endorsing the fossil fuel treaty. We have thousands of civil society organizations, and we've just started our business program. So remember right now, how you choose to spend your time and with whom is critical. Clean tech can't clean up fossil fuels. Right now, we already have enough oil, gas, and coal under construction to take us past 2 degrees. And there are many companies, some of you are here, who are working with companies like Exxon. Their use of AI will allow them in the Permian to expand to an increase of 50,000 barrels a day more with AI tools. And the US is already the largest expander of fossil fuels, oil and gas planned in the next 5 years. More oil and gas is planned to expand in the US than anywhere else in the world. Between now and 2050, close to 50% of everything planned is in the wealthy countries. So I know this is hard. This work is difficult. And these conversations are challenging. But we can't continue to spend our financial, our political, our intellectual capital on building more of the problem. Every ton of carbon right now that we save from going into the atmosphere will save lives. So use your time wisely. Use your companies wisely and join us, because together we're so much more powerful than apart. It does take courage and hard conversations, but the great thing about courage is that courage is contagious. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Editor at Large, Heather Clancy.
not, but if I didn't, I'm Heather Clancy. I'm the editor-at-large for GreenBiz, and I am joined by two amazing thinkers in one of the things that Shale was addressing, which is carbon and how do we remove it. Like, I love the framing that he made of Climatech. I've always struggled with this as a journalist, like, what's Climatech? What fits? I love that framing. So we're going to talk about where we are in the carbon markets today, as well as carbon removal, and what we need to get this speeded up. How do we get to a different place? I have two great experts with me, as I mentioned. Julio Friedman is at Carbon Direct. He has a long time history in mouthing off on this stuff. He's got a great perspective, and he's working now on helping great companies that are pioneers manage their carbon removal programs. And I'm also joined by the co-founder and CEO of Heirloom, one of these great carbon removal technology companies, Shashank Samala. So I wanted to put a very general question to both of you first and to get the conversation started. I'm actually going to go to you first, Julio, which is just like, there's been so much, as a journalist, I'm like, I have no idea what to cover. There's been so much that's happened in the markets this year. What do you feel is like the most significant thing, the one thing that really stands out as a tipping point or something that we all should be taking note of?
Sure. So before I say something, let me say something. The reason why we have the carbon markets, the reason why we need to do a lot of carbon dioxide removal is the arithmetic. The core arithmetic of climate has told us that we have to do this. Like Shale was saying, we're probably going to overshoot. We have to do carbon management. We have to do carbon removal. Well, the most important thing I've seen in the markets, to your question, is a bifurcation. And what we're starting to see is a split between what Carbon Direct we call the high quality market and the high risk market. And that those are two rather different kinds of things, and they represent two different kinds of buyers, and they represent many, many different ways of getting into it. But that recognition that you need to get the thing you buy to get quality, that is new, and it is leading to that split.
So a little bit more color on what's high risk. Define those two a little bit more.
Sure. So if you have valid, durable CO2 removal, that's good. And that can be done with reforestation in trees. That can be done with direct air capture and geological storage. That can be done with biochar. There's lots of ways to do it. But it has to be additional. It has to be durable. It has to be equitable and just. It can't create new problems, right? The life cycle has to pencil out. There's some very basic aspects of this. And so if you're tall enough to go on that ride, then you can enter the quality market, and there's buyers who want to buy what you got.
Shashank?
So there's three things I think we're seeing as a company the last really 2 years. One is this rush towards high quality removals, something that is additional, that is verifiable, that's quantifiable, it's durable. So if you remove the carbon from the air, is it actually permanently sequestered, or is it coming back out, right? Like something that is very concerning to our customers are, soil carbon or forests. They're easy to get caught in the fire or decompose and putting the carbon back in the air. So what they love about direct air capture is you can pull it from the air and geologically store it permanently for thousands of years so that it doesn't come back out. So what you've seen with the low quality offsets, which is sort of the old regime, there's basically, those markets are frozen at this point. It's really, you're not really seeing them liquidate smooth, and all of that focus is coming into high quality removals. And 2 years ago, we would not have expected how fast this was, but in the last year or so, that's changed quickly. So we just announced a few weeks ago a 350,000 ton deal with Microsoft. It's the largest of its kind. It's multi-$100 million deal. And just a year ago, no one would have imagined that type of big resources coming in to catalyze this industry. The other thing we are seeing is federal support for high quality removals, specifically direct air capture. So we were just chosen for a direct air capture hub that is funded up to $600 million. We're building a 1 million ton per year hub in Louisiana. And the government is actually also starting to procure carbon removals as a customer. So there's so many things happening. It's awesome to see.
So I want to poke into the issue of removals versus avoidance, right? Because I think some of the things you're referring to are in terms of the low quality, if you want to use that term, was more in the avoidance realm versus removal. So is there Is there a recognition that we need to somehow balance the two in the market? Is there a balance emerging that we think is necessary?
So I think it goes back again to something that Shale was talking about. There is, in fact, a whole lot of valuable stuff to do, but if it's not actually removing carbon, then you shouldn't call it carbon removal. And that's actually what people want to buy, is carbon removal as a service. Avoided deforestation is a priority of the world. We got to do that. We haven't figured out how to stop chopping down forests. We should do that. Does that actually remove carbon dioxide? In most cases, it doesn't. Now, I want to be really, really clear about this. We believe that there are perfectly good REDD+ projects that do remove CO2. That's great. Most of those are avoided. Some of that's useful too. But there's an awful lot of stuff out there which is bunk. And we think that it's important for buyers to be sophisticated on the science, on the application, on the monitoring, on how you demonstrate this stuff, so that they get the carbon they bought.
Yeah, it's really, like, the problem exists. There's nothing wrong about avoiding deforestation. We should absolutely do that as much as possible. The problem is, it's like round peg or square peg in a round hole. Like, you're putting this carbon financing mechanism, calling it carbon credit, into, it's like, if you really want to avoid forest, just like put in some absolute dollars to go and solve that problem instead of trying to add this carbon financing mechanism, which really makes it very tough.
Right.
I want to go back to what you were talking about in terms of the government. And I'm going to ask you a question about the voluntary markets next. But so tell me a little bit more about the government procurement and how that's helping reframe the market.
Yeah, what we're seeing is the government getting very involved in helping catalyze the market.
Like materials.
Yeah, I mean, it's the infrastructure bill has about $3.5 billion towards creating and funding 4 directly captured hubs, and each hub would capture about 1 million tons a year by the end of the decade. So we're talking, really big catalytic capital. And what we're also seeing is government procurement. So in the carbon markets right now, we are still wrapping our heads around exactly how do you measure, how do you verify, what are the standards, which is good, which is okay, which is bad. Right now, who is the enforcer of those values and standards? And we're seeing the government step in and say, hey, here's the good stuff and here's the not so good stuff.
What does not so good mean?
I'll let
Right, so again, we've published our criteria for what high quality is. I encourage everyone to go to Carbon Credit's website, go to the criteria for high quality CO2 removals. This is something we do every year with Microsoft. We published it back in June. And those things that I talked about, additionality, durability, is it measured and monitored? Is it verified? Is it just? These things are pretty straightforward, and that's what quality is measured. And for every single pathway, whether it's carbon dioxide removal by trees, or by soils, or by biochar, or by enhanced weathering, we say, this is what you must do, this is what you should do. There's no mystery to this, actually. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, setting a baseline, and then on top of that, there's nice.
But I want to go back to something that you had just talked about a moment ago, Shashank, which is this government procurement. The Department of Energy has just put out a solicitation where they said, hey, we want to buy quality CO2 removal. And this is what's interesting about it. First of all, like all clean technologies, in fact, all major technologies were started by government procurement. It doesn't matter whether it's flat screen TVs or semiconductors or LEDs or batteries or solar panels, like there was always a government procurement that got you down the learning curve. That's great. The other thing about it is they're going to define what they say is quality. The Department of Energy will say you must be this tall to go on this ride. At which point, if you're not that tall, they're like, well, we'd like to help you get better, but we can't buy from you yet. It also means that they can say, we'll have another round in the future when we have more money. We would love to invite you back. So this is a virtuous cycle that spins up the definitions of quality, the creation of standards, and ultimately those things are going to feed into a compliance market. Because right now the market's entirely voluntary. We are doing this because we believe it's important, not because it's required by law. Those standards that groups like DOE procurement's going to lay out, or the EU Fit for 55 provisions, these things are going to define quality in a way that creates a compliance market, which will then be much, much larger than the voluntary market.
What's the time frame? I mean, like, we keep talking about sorry. I've known you a long, long time, and we've talked about this for a long time. But realistically, I mean, we could see another swing back to a different place.
So standards is the hard boarding of boards. You'll learn by doing, you gotta try stuff. But there's two different ways that standards appear. One of them is you go to the ISO and a bunch of scientists beaver away, and in 5 to 10 years, they're like, here's the standard. Alternatively, the market just doesn't. So the standard for USB 2.0, no government agencies were in there, a bunch of buyers and a bunch of sellers said, this is the standard. This is what we're gonna do. So I think it can go quickly, and that's, again, an important role of the voluntary carbon market. That as we deploy, as we learn, we have the opportunity to make it better and defend and define what that means. And so again, I think that's going to accelerate that bifurcation, but it's also going to bring in new buyers. Once people understand, oh, that's what quality is, then they're going to be more inclined to buy it.
That actually, I want to continue with that point because I love what some of these large tech companies are doing. But how do we get more folks into this marketplace? I mean, there's still a lot of pioneering work. The deals that you're announcing, the deals that some of the other more successful direct air capture companies, they're hard for a certain company to be participating in. So how do we pull more buyers into this market?
Eventually, the answer is compliance markets. So
I think we have to do that.
We have to do that. Yeah, I mean, like, what is it? The voluntary market is a couple $1 billion. The compliance market is at $800 billion.
580, yeah, it's big.
It's ridiculous, right? It's like, so that is eventually what gets us to net zero, right? But I think in the meantime, what these catalytic buyers are doing, you know, the Stripes, the Microsofts, Shopify's, Google's, Meta's, I mean, there's a good section of them.
Yep.
They're driving tens of millions of tons of demand. And given that the supply of this market is still constrained, right, over the next few years, we're all ramping up to millions of tons. It's you know, it's a lot of the times I hear the word supply constrained market. But in many ways, like it is over the next 5 years or so. But after that, we need the demand to follow. We need tens of millions to hundreds of millions of tons of demand. Because without that demand, there is not enough of demand signal for us to go and build these projects, which take multiple years to build.
So these advanced market commitments, if you will, the things that we've seen a couple of, are they super important? We need more of them?
We need a lot more, absolutely. So, you know, the thing about advanced market commitments, you know, is that they're bankable contracts. For us, what that means is that just like how solar and wind projects and natural gas, you know, highways, roads, bridges, and all of the infrastructure is built based on project financing, low-cost infrastructural capital that you can unlock when you have contracts that are bankable, that have clear, airtight contracts where if you produce, the customer pays. It's called a take or pay contract. So that's the template that we're creating, and you know, 10 years from now, we'll look back and say, hey, this template is as unsexy as it is. That's really probably going to be the most catalytic thing the industry has done. Just like, you know, 12, 15 years ago, the power purchasing agreement, the PPA, is what really kicked off the solar and wind industry. Same thing is happening right now for carbon removal.
Right. One more question for you before we talk about the big problem, the infrastructure. Earlier this month, your company said that you would refuse investments from companies whose primary business is oil and gas production. Was there a specific catalyst for that declaration? And what's been the reaction?
So, was there a catalyst? Well, I think what we realized is that this space needed a leadership in values. And we wanted to build a race to the top in terms of standards of deployment. There's lots of ways, especially when it's a new industry, there's many ways you can go, right? We are at the forefront, and every step that we take, we have a juncture. Like, do we go this way or do we go that way? You know, social media companies 10 years ago probably faced this question before regulation came in. And I think for us, it was very important to us that we lead with values, and what we wanted to do was CO2 from the atmosphere is not used as a way to continue the extraction of fossil fuels. That's something even I cannot go to bed at night. You know, if we took investment from oil and gas and that really messed up our governance, or we gave a board seat, that's something we won't do. And what we also won't do is we won't use our CO2 for the oil industry uses to recover more oil.
So that's something we won't do. We also published a few other standards. We were going to say, we were going to measure and report and verify exactly the amount of carbon we remove and publish that with the communities where we build these facilities and to the customers. The third thing we said was we were going to build a robust community benefit agreement with wherever we go and place these, so that we can lift the communities that we are part of. Not a lot of these communities were part, some of the most burdened communities in the past with oil and gas and industry. So that's something we want to change.
Right.
And the last thing we said was we're going to pay prevailing wages and actually create a whole new generation of jobs.
So the IEA, yeah. The IEA came out today and said they have a pretty wild prediction for the end of the decade as to the capacity. We know that there's not much direct air capture capacity right now. We need a lot more capacity. We need this big infrastructure thing, and we need it fast. So how do we get this accelerated, and how do we do it in a fair way? Like you were just saying, I'm going to go to you first.
So again, just some quick numbers. Grab onto your seats, the news is grim. If you look at the most recent summary report from the IPCC, it says that we need about 1.6 billion tons of CO2 removal by 2030 to hit a 1.5 target. So that's not a lot of time. And that is making a very large industry. 1.6 gigatons, that's about all the same as the size as all the steel in the world. All the steel in the world is 2.2 gigatons of weight. So it's a big number. We gotta go super fast and super hard. Government procurement helps, standards help, advanced market commitments, voluntary market actions help, investment in technology helps, but there are two things that keep me up at night, the things we really don't have to get this going. First, infrastructure. Pipes, holes in the ground, hubs of activity. The direct air capture hubs help. Some of the hubs in the UK and in Europe help. But when you look at the tonnage, that's not going to get us to 1.5 gigatons by 2030. We just need a lot more of these things. And that means we also need a workforce to build it. We don't have the pipe fitters or welders or electricians. We don't have the tax equity lawyers or communications experts or regulators. We have to create a mammoth industry in a very short amount of time. We don't have the workforce. So these are things that we really need to get that to scale. And if we have that workforce, if we have that infrastructure, it's going to make people like Shashank's job a lot easier because they'll be able to say, oh, well, great. Well, now my risk for the project is lower. The cost for the project is lower. We can move a lot faster, and we'll start working our way down the cost curve.
Great. Well, we're out of time, I'm afraid. I know. What happened? Please thank them for their insights. I think we have a little more to say in about an hour in the panel. With that, thank you very much for your attention, and we're on. We're off.
Oh, what an amazing chat. And Heather Clancy, she is our editor-at-large and a very talented journalist. If you haven't checked out her stuff, I recommend that you do. She has a piece this week coming out on financing missions that I recommend everyone must read. We have just one more talk today, which is our end of the keynote program on the first day of Verge. But this is just the beginning of Verge. We have our first breakout sessions after this. And I encourage all of you to go to the reception, meet one another, continue these conversations. And I also want to have a special shout out to our sponsors. Without you, we would not be able to do this. This is a group of organizations that truly understand the importance of convening when it comes to addressing the climate crisis. I want to give out a special thank you to Deloitte and Hitachi and NextEra Energy, our foundational sponsors. And I also would love to, how many organizations are here? It's incredible. I would also love to call out our sustainability sponsors as well, or our sustainability partners. which are the organizations that are making it so this event is as sustainable as possible, and offsetting all of your travel here and having zero waste partners for this event as well. So I would like to introduce our final speaker, who is Yvonne White-Newsom. She is part of the White House Council on Environmental Quality, and this is a person that truly understands what it means for communities to be living under the impacts of climate change. That she is from Detroit, and she has been in several different locations throughout the world during extreme weather, including during a heat wave in Paris in 2003, the Chicago heat wave in 2005, back when these were truly anomalies. And now she's part of the White House and making sure that as we're considering this clean transition, we're considering all people. So with that, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. White-Newsom for our final talk on the Verge stage. Thank you. Hello. So, good afternoon, Verge23. It is so wonderful to be here in beautiful San Jose. And I want to give my appreciation to the Lonely Sisters, because if we don't acknowledge those folks that were here before us, taking care of the land before us, then my goodness, we're in trouble. So thank you, Lonely Sisters, for acknowledging the original stewards of this land. So when I think about environmental justice, for me, it involves three cornerstones: people, policy, and practice. And the way that we interweave those together can really help us achieve that just, healthy, sustainable world that we all deserve. And when I think about environmental justice, before I dig in, I want to ask you a question. And I don't know if I'll be able to see hands in this room, but raise your hand if you know what environmental justice is. Okay, thank you for the house lights. I see a couple, awesome. So for those hands that I didn't see raised, I want you to visualize with me a world where you can step out of your front door, breathe clean air, and not experience the taste of sulfur or particulate matter in your mouth. I want you to imagine being able to send your babies to school and not be afraid that just from drinking out of the water fountain, that they're going to be drinking water contaminated with lead. I want you to think about the opportunity to provide clean school buses and clean transportation in all communities across this country. I want you to think about being able to afford and access fresh fruits and vegetables for your family. Again, that's not hard to imagine, but that reality is not something that everybody experiences. So when we think about the opportunity to imagine environmental justice, a place where the color of your skin, your ethnicity, how much you make at the end of the year, what zip code you live in, that doesn't have to dictate whether you have a healthy or sustainable community or not. That is what environmental justice is. And I'm